How long have you been retired, Andy?
9 years.
9 years, really?
Yep, yep. I retired at the end of 2014.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea it'd been that long.
Yeah.
Well, since then, what has been, uh, has radio played any part in your life whatsoever? I mean, apart from working on a day-to-day basis, do you listen to the radio at all?
Actually, I don't. I don't that much. Yeah, I obviously I don't have an hour-long plus commute anymore into Los Angeles, and the furthest I go is to Ventura, which is about a half mile north of my house. I mean, a half hour north of my house,
Yeah.
and it's an easy commute, so I don't need traffic. And for the most part, I'll listen to podcasts, and I don't listen to terrestrial radio, even our past stations.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a common thread that we're going to find here, and certainly it's true. It's true for me, even though I'm still in the business. I
It
still go
pops
in.
up. It pops up on the radio, but primarily in the car.
Yeah.
I don't have any radio. I mean, I guess one sitting in the corner is an emergency radio, but I basically don't have radios to listen to in the house. I'll listen on smart speakers, and if I really want to listen to a radio station.
Is that a result of technological changes and advancements and programming options?
Well, I have always, I live in Ventura County, north of Los Angeles, and I was always in a place where I didn't really get the Los Angeles signals that well. It was always kind of marginal. So I was an early adopter of internet radio. But those are kind of a pain to use compared to the smart speakers. So once they came out, it's pretty easy to say, you know, play KNX News or something like that, and at least I didn't say the A word and have it go off. But then I could actually start it up, and it's so easy and simple. Started in 1975 at a family-owned station. It was evolving into becoming a news talk station in San Jose, California, KXRX. And I worked there as a reporter and an editor and an announcer, and for 5 or 6 years. And in 1979, my boss and mentor, Vic Bremer, invited me to go with him to Cairo in Seattle as his managing editor. And it was a great time because that was the
Yeah.
beginning of Cairo's at least 2 decade domination of the market there. So it was a really fun and exciting station to work at. In 1984, the big corporate boss offered me a promotion, which was my first program director's job at the company's news talk station in Kansas City, KMBZ. And within 2 years, we built that station up to #1 in the market. We acquired the world champion Kansas City Royals at the time. And I also served as the program director for our easy listening FM station, which was KMBR, which I knew nothing about, but it's a long, weird story. But in 1987, I returned to Cairo as director of news and programming. Eventually, I became the vice president of news operations for Cairo AM, FM, and television, and ran a 160-member combined news department. I left Cairo in 1993. I went to King AM in Seattle, which was a talk station. That didn't last long because it got sold in 1994. My wife and I wanted to move back to Los Angeles because we had a daughter who was getting ready to start college, and I think the university system here in California is excellent. So we wanted to kind of reestablish residency. So I took a job as the Southwest Regional Director of Operations for Metro Networks, which, if you'll remember, provided news and sports and traffic reports
Right.
for radio and television stations. And I worked primarily in LA and San Diego. But that was more of a sales job than I liked. And I
Yeah.
kind of found that I missed working at a radio station. So in 1996, I became the program director at KABC and KMPC in Los Angeles. In 98, I moved to the legendary news station KFWB, which as a news station lives only in legend now, Los Angeles. And I would spend the next 16 years there in a number of roles, including program director. And in 2009, while I was still program director of KFWB, I became the program director at KNX. And so I served in both those roles until I retired in
I
2000.
had I had no idea that, and this is just kind of a side comment. It may not make it into the final cut, but I'm fascinated by the fact it sounds like practically your entire career has been spent in management. Did you have any significant on-air time?
I did quite a bit on air well, obviously in San Jose and Seattle. Um, both times when I was in Seattle, though the latter time I was, more in management. But I always kept an on-air role. But certainly by the time I got to Los Angeles and everything, then it was purely in a management role. But it was
Or
good to have done it. It was good to have worked as a reporter. It was good to have worked as an anchor. It was good to have worked as an editor, because I think it enhances your credibility as a manager because you've actually done the job. I may not have been the greatest, but I mean, in my mind, I was.
well, not only credibility, but it helps you understand what those people are doing and how they're going about it and how you can help them out and all that. I skipped my very first question. We kind of got into that a little bit, understanding your lack of a daily relationship with radio at this point. But do you think this technology and radio, as we've known it in terms of formats and all that, is it dead? Is radio dead?
Well, if it's not dead, it's at least circling the drain, at least the radio that you and I kind of grew up with. And I think unless we stop deluding ourselves and create completely new products and innovative delivery systems that appeal not to us, that's what's so important. I always program for people like me, but I can't do that anymore, or I shouldn't do that anymore. You have to program to the youngest generation. And if you don't do that, the terrestrial radio will disappear. And it may still. We may have to redefine what we call radio.
Is that primarily a function of the technology changes? I mean, broadcasting through the airwaves from a transmitter out in the, back 40s really does seem kind of old fashioned at this point.
Well, yeah. I mean, it all ties together because I think of my own expectations. I really like having everything on my phone.
Yeah.
I like being able to get it on my phone, and if I want to, I can put what's on my phone on in my car, and or I can put it on in the house. I can do whatever I want to do with that little computer that I'm carrying around in my pocket. And we spend a sizable amount of money on our phones to have that capability. I only see that growing and being enhanced, and so why? I mean, I think the most important thing is to look at the younger and younger people and get an idea of how they're using radio. My framework is that of a baby boomer, but we're in our 70s.
Right.
We can't really program to baby boomers, and I mean, even if you start looking at some of the other generations, the youngest Gen Xer is in their 40s.
Right.
The youngest millennial is nearing 30, and you can't trust anybody over 30, right? So, I mean, in my mind, we need to start looking at people like the Gen Zs. These are like my grandkids. They're 13 to 24, somewhere in that range.
Right.
And future radio needs to be designed with their likes and wants and habits in mind. And radio is just not part of their habit at all.
I'd like to ask you about deregulation.
Okay.
That's
The deep,
1981. That's when the FCC said, okay, you companies can have as many radio stations as you want. Oh, maybe we'll limit you to 5 or 6 in one town or something like that. And that was completely radical. At the time, I guess back in the early 70s, I was working for RKO, which was the largest radio corporation in the world. They had 13 stations, 13. And now it's no holds barred, and you've got corporations that own 300, 400 stations. And the whole approach has changed.
well, but I mean, it's been disastrous. I mean, to me, in 84 and 96, the two different times when, the caps kept getting changed, it's been disastrous. And the consolidators took on this insane amount of debt, billions of dollars. And two big companies, iHeart and Cumulus, have had to restructure billions of dollars of debt. And now, if you look in the news, Odyssey is negotiating or whatever, begging, I don't know what they do, the terms of their bankruptcy right now. But the end result, it means that there's 11,000 radio stations in the country. I mean, roughly, give or take. And that means, with Odyssey, when Odyssey goes bankrupt, which seems inevitable, 14% of the radio stations in the country will be operating under the cloud of bankruptcy. And and most of those stations are in, major, large, and medium markets, and not so much in the smaller markets. And so, the end result is that's not a climate for innovation. That's not a climate for creating new products and new approaches. It's a climate for hanging on for dear life.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm also thinking, people in our business, frequently you hear these days somebody say, well, the corporation's radio is all run by the bean counters these days. I would add, yeah, probably even more than that, it's run by the lawyers that the corporation has. And a great deal of the actual functioning on a local level and the day-to-day operation of radio stations is done in fear of somebody saying the wrong thing or putting the wrong picture on the website, or getting their personal getting problems in their personal files and so forth.
Well, I think the fear, I think the fear ties into the consolidation, in the fact that consolidation has created an environment where we have cookie cutter radio stations.
Yeah.
So instead of having a diverse group of local stations appealing to the people who live in that particular market, you've got cookie cutter stations. And I'm not just talking about news and talk formats, but you've also got the same thing with music formats, where it's devoid of personality, minimal talking, and pretty much the same thing. So the sad thing is, I can use my smart speaker. I don't want to say her name again. I can use my smart speaker, and I could dial up any radio station I want.
Right.
But I don't have any great urge to do it, because I don't think I'm going to hear anything different than I'm going to hear locally. So you've got the consolidation creating that. I also think the ratings methodology has contributed to that too, because back in the old days, we used diaries, and people, and many broadcasters hated diaries. And the big flaw with diaries was the fact that it was based on your recall. So it had a lot to do with how well you marketed your brand or presented your image of the radio station to listeners. So sometimes people that worked at the second favorite radio station would complain that their listening wasn't being counted, because people would say, oh yeah, well, I turned on WXYZ and that's what I listened to all morning, when it was really found that people would listen to maybe 5 radio stations throughout the morning, but the other ones weren't getting credit. But now with the people meters, where, and while there are flaws and problems with the sample sizes and all of that, there's always a problem with everything. But now you're getting theoretically a more accurate reading. But one of the things that that has done is created an environment where, okay, we can see this is the easiest way to manipulate an audience. You take breaks at precisely this time so that you maximize the number of minutes that you can create quarter hour credit and all of that. And so, what's happened is that, nothing is different. It's the safest thing to do is to do what everybody else does. And if you were to upend the buck the trend, do something different, work with some sort of radically different clock, I think that's going to fall apart. And plus, we fight to cram in way too many commercials.
Yeah.
And one of the big appeals, to me is to, of the podcast is to, I don't mind hearing a few commercials, especially ones done by the host in their own style and kind of relating to the, the topic of whatever I'm listening to, versus hearing, I mean, my God, my last station, we'd run over 20 minutes of commercials an hour. That's a third of the hour. And no matter how creative and how much you hide it and tuck it away and put it in places, that's too many commercials.
Yeah. You know what I really miss? I guess this really hit me when I got here to Dallas. Although if I stopped and thought about it, it probably been going on for some time. And that is when I got into the business, I was very young, and I was a top 40 disc jockey, and that was when life was great in radio and everything else. And boy, I'll tell you what, all my young colleagues were all in our late teens and early 20s, and we would go in and we'd do our shift and we'd get in there and hang out together. And they sometimes kind of had to like throw us out of the radio station. Well, that was okay, because we'd go over to somebody's apartment and we'd get in there and we'd listen to air checks from the guys in the bigger markets, and we'd talk about the craft and how to do this and how to say that and what's a better way of it. And we had these conversations going on all the time because of our passion for the business. I haven't seen any of that in at least, well, I would say 30 years or 40 years, but then most of that has been in major markets where people just, pretty well are settled into their ways. But even trying to start a conversation these days with young broadcasters, people who are relatively new to the business, you just don't find that interest in how can I get better? How can I do this better? The passion is gone, and maybe that's got a lot to do with everything else we've discussed at this point.
I mean, you meet certain individuals that are clearly determined and maybe highly focused on their careers, and you can see them doing the best that they can, but I don't see them having the, what I always thought was a nice traditional route, which was to work in smaller markets and be surrounded by professionals in that market who would share their, not only just their skills, but kind of their radio ethics with you, where you would together you'd learn the craft, and you had an opportunity to make some mistakes on a playing field that was a little bit smaller. So that, I mean, if you made some of those mistakes in a major market, it'd be your last day, on the air, or your days would be numbered. And on top of it, in the biggest markets, how do you necessarily get on the air? I wasn't going to hire somebody who had never been on the air. First of all, they need to be in the union, and there's so many different things that I couldn't just say, oh my God, Dave Williams just keeled over in his chair. Go on in there, kid. Show us what you can do. It's not going to happen. You just couldn't do it. And so it was tough.
Well, I'll tell you what, times have changed in all that respect too. And I spent a little time in Chicago a few years ago, and we had young people working for the station, doing writing, and I was sure coming straight out of Northwestern University, the J school there, great college. But they were getting on the air, and not only at our station, but at other stations in Chicago uh, as their first jobs. and, and you say, well, they had a lot of great mentors. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I can tell you right now, from my own personal experience here in Dallas, I can listen to the radio station, any radio station, and I listen and I go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. You got 3 or 4 guys, they're talking to each other, they're not talking to the audience, they're talking about something goofy that happened over the weekend. They're not focused on sports or whatever it is they're supposed to be doing. Well, don't these people have any guidance? And I've found in a lot of cases, no, they don't.
I don't think they do. I don't think they do. And in many cases, the program directors didn't have the guidance themselves.
Right.
So it's kind of a building sort of problem. And more often than not, what happens is, and regardless of the format, people are just told, just shut up, just do it, don't push the envelope, just read this, and that's one of the reasons I think, that's one of the ways we've devalued AM radio stations, is that we have stopped presenting product of any sort of value. And we've just determined, okay, this is a place for brokered programming and recorded syndicated shows and foreign language programming.
Bonus
And
spots from the Big Brother station.
Horrible sports betting things or something like that. And so the end result is, these stations, when they once great radio stations, sell for a fraction of their value. And I really worry that at some point in time, people will decide that it's more valuable to run some sort of cell phone service or something like that on the AM spectrum, and we lose it altogether. So
yeah, well, I guess we're starting to sound like a couple old farts.
I know, and I never really wanted to I never really wanted to sound like that, because I think I was fortunate. I think I kind of I worked through, I think, one of the last golden ages of radio, the 80s.
Yeah.
And there was the will, and there was the money, and the desire to build great teams and to build great radio stations. And the latter part of my career, I found that I was mostly being asked to do more with fewer people. And I was being asked questions like, do we really need business news, or do we really need sports? And so you were spending your time just hanging on. You weren't building anything. You were just kind of hanging on, trying to save jobs, trying to save the services that you thought your listeners wanted.
Do you have any final word? Do you have any advice for people? I run into these people once in a while and go, young people, 20s, 30s, and they go, oh man, I'd love to get in radio. And I look at them like, no. Listen, son, if you were my son, if you were my grandson, I'd have to give you some different advice here at this point. There's no future in this business, is there?
Well, I don't know. One part of me thinks that there always is going to be a need for on-demand audio that I can turn on in some form and listen to it. I'm beginning to feel like it won't necessarily be stick broadcasting or terrestrial broadcasting, because I don't think it has what, it's instantly accessible, but it's not time shiftable, and it's not fast, and for the most part, it's not fun. And if you look, when I was talking earlier about those really young listeners, the Gen Zs, basically, what they want. I mean, if you look at what they consume YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok. And interestingly, the fifth most common thing that they consume is Twitter, which really surprised me, but they do it to stay up to date with news and follow some celebrity trends and things like that. But the other things are, are short form, diverse content, videos, games, and it all shapes pop culture. So I think I would advise those people, and I have been for a long time, is to get into some form of audio broadcasting, but don't necessarily, I mean, casting, but don't necessarily feel that you're going to be doing it on a radio. And perhaps, perhaps one of the things that the AM band could become would be more of a digital distribution service, so that I could get my signal to my phone or whatever the device of the future might be, and I could get a selection of time shiftable programs that I could put on my phone, and maybe it gets to me over the AM band.
Got two more thoughts about what you just said there. First of all, excuse me. Yeah, you're talking about things being on demand, and of course that's something that's most popular right now. And as a matter of fact, I have a good friend. I think you know him, but I'm gonna save him till I actually talk to him. But he told me, I said, whatever happened to live and local? Nobody seems to care about that anymore, at least at the corporate level. He says listeners don't care anymore about live and local. He said listeners want on demand. And that was a little bit stunning to me. What do you think?
Um, I think live and local is a little bit of a it might be a little bit manufactured because it sounds good. It sounds good promotionally.
Yeah.
But the times I really need radio to be a lot to live is when there's some sort of an emergency. So
Especially if it's local.
especially well, yeah, obviously if it's when I talk about an emergency, I only mean local, because if it's not local, it's not really an emergency.
Right.
I mean, to be in the coldest sense. So I need that information, but how often are you in an emergency?
Right.
So if there is some sort of method for you to be able to get on demand news or information in an emergency, I think people will seek that out. But I think for their regular listening, they don't necessarily need it. And I think in some ways having the convenience of being time shiftable, that I can put it on when I want, I can stop it when I want, I can go back to it,
Right.
is is more important. I mean, it was funny. I was talking to my daughter about their family listening habits, and she's 45, and she used to listen to the radio sometimes when she would drive to work, and she'd listen to NPR, but she stopped doing that. They don't have a radio in the house. They listen to music, I think, on Apple Music over their TV or something like that. And my daughter could only think of the time that my granddaughter would seek out a radio station is around Christmas time, when stations are playing Christmas music. She would insist that her mother put it on in the car, and she said mostly to torture us. What I thought was interesting is, this girl knew that Christmas music was available on a radio station at a certain time of the year, and she could get exactly the product that she wanted for whatever her malicious purpose was, if it was just to annoy her family. But so I think they will seek it out if we can provide it. But I just don't see radio as we know it overcoming the problems that are presented by the various streaming services. Now, that being said, the one thing that I tend to miss, and certainly I have trouble listening to any sort of music stream for the same reason I had trouble listening to CDs or something like that in my car, is I had nobody talking to me. And I miss the human contact. And so, and even terrestrial radio, that's drifted away. Even in the largest markets, you don't have people talking to you like they used to. I remember learning tons about music from KMET and KPPC here in Los Angeles, back in the 60s and 70s and everything like that. And they would go on, it was absolutely fascinating, but nobody would do a show like that anymore. I mean, there was a guy who would play the, old blues roots of rock music, and really give you a history lesson on blues music, and how it all tied into the rock music that we loved at the time. And but you just wouldn't get that now, but you might get it on a podcast.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you, man. I'm with you in terms of, as I said, I'm still in the business, and yet for the most part, all I listen to are podcasts. I could even get in trouble for saying that. I do listen to some sports talk when it's regarding, local team that's of interest to me. But yeah, it's like, why should I listen to a music station when I've got 6,000 songs in my phone? Right? The
Right.
songs that I chose. So I don't know.
And if you want someone else to curate it for you, then you can go to satellite radio or
Right.
something like
Right.
that. Still have, a minimal to no commercials. Yeah.
But I think you touched on the most important part. We'll let it go there. But that is that, the human contact aspect, something that we're losing a lot in all sorts of facets of modern day life. I mean, they are really putting together hamburger joints like McDonald's, where there'll be no people working in there. You just go in and you push buttons and your hamburger pops out and off you go.
I know, but the kiosks are so confusing for us old people.
Yeah, right. Right.
I just want a cheeseburger. Come on. Don't make it so hard. I went out one time to a McDonald's with a young friend of mine, and I'm staring at this kiosk, and he goes, "Oh, come on." And he reaches up and punches in all the appropriate responses.
Well, I'm sorry. That's just silly. I mean, the girl is standing there at the counter 6 feet away. I'm going to go tell her what I want still.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, man. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Good talking to you. Glad to see you're looking good and hale and hearty.